Good morning. I'm going to continue in 1 Peter 2 and talk about the wonder of the fact that once we weren't God's people and now we are God's people. Most of you who are listening to me, most of us are not Jewish by descent. So we wouldn't be classed as God's people. As Gentiles, we would be called by the Jews of Jesus' time, and maybe even the Jews of today would still call non-Jewish people Gentiles. We had no right to any of the promises of the Old Testament because we weren't part of the Jewish group, the descendants of Abraham. And the wonderful prophet Hosea, if you've never read Hosea, if you get a chance today, read Hosea chapter 1. Hosea was an amazing prophet. I must just say here, the reason we have each of the prophets in the Old Testament is because in each of them there is something of importance about Jesus. They all prophesied something that was important for us to understand. And Hosea was told by the Lord to marry a woman who was a prostitute. And he was to be in front of the people of his day as a living prophecy, showing the relationship between God and his people. Hosea portrayed God, and his wife Gomer was God's people. And she was unfaithful persistently to her husband. And the people of Hosea's day were unfaithful to God in worshipping other gods and going after other ideologies and things. And in that chapter you'll see that she bore 3 children that were technically Hosea's children, but it's probable that all of them were, as described in Hosea chapter 1, children of harlotry or prostitution. Hosea didn't know who their parents were. And one of them was called Not Pitied, and one of them was called Not My People. If you read verses 9 and 10 of Hosea 1, you'll see that he named the 3rd child Not My People. But then there's a promise immediately following that there would come a day when those who were called Not My People would be called sons of God. And this is the fulfillment. We are the fulfillment of that prophecy, because once we were not God's people. We were Gentiles. But we've been born into his family, and we are now God's people. And Peter picks up this idea in 1 Peter 2, verse 10 really. It says, once you were no people, but now you are God's people. Once you'd not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. That not received mercy is a reference to one of the other children that Hosea's wife bore. He named them prophetically under the instruction of the Lord to try and teach people how dreadful it was what they were doing in the sight of God. And what I wanted to say today was, once we were outsiders. We weren't in, we were out. But as Paul describes in Romans, we have been grafted in to the vine that God planted when he planted his people, Israel. And they are his people, and Jesus said to his church, I am the vine, you are the branches. And we have been grafted in to God's people. Once we were outsiders, once we were Gentiles, once we didn't receive mercy or deserve mercy, but now we're in. That's what Jesus has done for us, for Gentiles. Paul describes it in Ephesians as breaking down the barrier between Jew and Gentile. It was a very hard thing for the early church to understand, and many people didn't understand it and didn't accept it. They felt that people had to become a Jew before they could be Christians, that you could only be a Christian if you fully accepted all the Old Testament laws and the Jewish way. That's not true. Jesus brought in a new covenant where all could come to faith, and that entry was by faith, not by circumcision or by birth. Entry was by faith. Believing, as Peter describes it here, believing that Jesus is the one chosen by God, is the precious cornerstone, believing him, in him, and following him. And so he's able to say in 1 Peter 2 verse 9, but you are a chosen race. Instead of an interloper child, a child that isn't yours, we have become God's children. We have been born into his family. You, my dear friend, and we are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people. Once we were no people, now we are God's people. It's a wonderful thing, It doesn't matter what your human background is. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter where you were born or what class of person you were. It doesn't matter what your parents were or who anybody was. God doesn't have any grandchildren or great-grandchildren. It doesn't matter what age you are. You come to Jesus in faith and you become part of God's people, his chosen race. Chosen before the foundation of the world. You belong. Many people don't feel they belong, really, with so much breakup of family in modern Western life. So many people really don't know who they are, and they struggle with their identity. They struggle, perhaps, if the parents have split up and there's been enmity, they struggle with identity. Well, once you're born again, you shouldn't be struggling with identity because you have a new identity. Once you were no people, now you are God's people. You're God's person. You're part of his kingdom. You're his responsibility. And he loves you. And he loves you. And all those years ago he gave to Hosea the amazing vision of what it was like to be back in God's people. Once you were no people, one day you will be called sons of God. It's in Hosea 1:10. What a wonderful thought. Have a great day. I hope you are able to meet with some our fellow worshippers of Jesus and bless his name today for all he's done for us. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.